Sophia Morris spent nearly half her life as a ghost in her own family's records. Not because anyone hit her, because that's simply how the Victorian system treated married women. 6 sisters, no brothers, a decade vanished from the census, and a marriage register that reduced her to 4 words: spinster of full age. This is the story of finding her anyway, in the gaps between other people's paperwork. Stay with us as we discover Sophia's story. If you enjoy it, please leave a thumbs up, and if you'd like more family history content, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Sophia Clode Chown was baptised in June of 1823 in Ottery St Mary, a small Devon town where her father William kept a butcher's shop and ran a carrier's business on the side. She was the 6th daughter born into that household and, as it turned out, the last. William and Margaret Chown raised 6 girls and not a single known son, which in a tradesman's family was no small thing. There was no boy to inherit the shop, no one to carry the Chown name forward in the usual way. 6 daughters would have to make their own futures, and that's exactly what they did. Sophia's own middle name is a small clue to how this family thought about identity. She was given Clode, her mother's maiden name, folded right into her own, almost as if the women of the family were quietly insisting on being remembered, name by name, even when the official record had little room for them. And here's where the story gets interesting, because those 6 daughters didn't simply stay put and wait for husbands to arrive. They scattered, and they scattered a long way. Sarah went north, first to Scotland, then back down to London. Elizabeth settled in Westminster. Young Jane went further than any of them, all the way to Victoria, Australia in 1852, decades before any of the men in this story even considered it. And Sophia herself disappears from her parents' household by 1841. For a long time that looked like a dead end. Then she turned up exactly where you might expect a resourceful 19-year-old with sisters already established in London to turn up. Working as a servant in her brother-in-law Timothy Turner's house in Westminster. Her sister Elizabeth delivered. It wasn't charity, it was family doing what family does, finding each other a way in. What's hard to explain is the decade that follows. By 1851, Sophia has vanished from the record again. No service position, no household, nothing yet found. It's one of the genuine open questions in this research, and if you're watching this with Devon or London ancestry from this period, we'd love to hear if anything rings a bell. By 1857 she resurfaces in Ilford, Essex, and within the year her life changes completely. On the 23rd of December 1857, Sophia Clode Chown married George Morris, a young schoolmaster, at the parish church in Great Ilford. She was 34, he was 25. We won't dwell on that gap here. If you have watched George's video, you already know the eyebrows it raised at the time. What's worth dwelling on is the marriage register itself, because it tells you everything about how this story almost wasn't told. After more than a decade of work, of moving between households, of holding her own life together, Sophia is recorded tersely, spinster of full age. No occupation, no history, just a status waiting to be replaced by a new one, wife. One small observation from that day. Among the witnesses was Timothy Turner, her brother-in-law, the same man in whose Westminster household she had worked as a teenage girl 16 years earlier. Family doesn't always show up in the documents, but sometimes it shows up in the room. George had taken up the post of schoolmaster at Charlbury Grammar School in Oxfordshire, and Sophia's married life became, in practice, the running of a small institution. By 1861, the household at Church Street included 13 boarding boys. 10 years later, there were still 11. That's not a household, that's a boarding school, and somebody had to feed, house and manage all of them year in, year out for decades. That somebody was Sophia. No document anywhere calls her a housekeeper, a matron or anything else. She is, officially, simply wife. Unofficially, she was running half the operation. The family's own children were few by comparison. Their first son, Robert, died in infancy in 1859, a loss this family, like so many Victorian families, simply absorbed and carried on from. Only 2 sons survived to adulthood, Will, who stayed close to home, and Charles James, CJ, who didn't. Because here's where another family pattern reasserts itself. By the time CJ's health decided, in 1897, that he needed to leave Europe altogether, despite time in Paris and then Barcelona, New Zealand was prescribed. Emigrating to the far side of the world was already something of a family tradition. Sophia's own sister, Jane, had done it back in 1852. George's siblings had done it too, several of them settling in Australia. So when CJ packed his bags, he wasn't taking some wild leap into the unknown. He was, in a sense, just catching up with his aunts, uncles and cousins, who had already made the crossing a generation earlier. The Morris Chown family had been quietly populating the southern hemisphere for years before CJ and his wife ever boarded a ship. Sophia lived out the rest of her life at Prospect Villa in Charlbury, the home the family moved to in the 1860s. Her recorded age drifts a little from census to census. 32 here, 45 there, a small, ordinary reminder of how loosely Victorian record keepers handled women's ages when nobody thought to check a birth certificate. In April of 1901, after a short illness, acute bronchitis on top of long-standing heart disease, Sophia died at home, in her own bed, with her daughter-in-law Anna at her side. Depending on which records are believed, she was between 76 and almost 78. By then she had outlived both her parents, her firstborn son, and watched the world change almost beyond recognition from the one she had been born into. She was buried at Charlbury Cemetery, and when George died 12 years later, he was laid in the very same plot. And yet his will, written a decade after her death, doesn't mention her at all. Not unusual for the period, simply how Victorian estates were typically handled, but a fittingly quiet final note for a woman whose whole life had a way of going unrecorded. So what does it actually take to find a woman like Sophia Morris? Patience, mostly, and a willingness to look in the gaps. In her sister's household instead of her parents', in a single line on a marriage register, in a decade when the record simply falls silent. We still haven't found her in 1851. We still don't know exactly how she and George met. Some of this story may always stay incomplete. But what we do have is enough to say this: Sophia wasn't a footnote in George Morris's career, or a name on a gravestone next to his. She was one of 6 resourceful Chown sisters who built their own lives across 2 continents, and for 40 years she was the quiet engine behind a school that history credits entirely to her husband. If you've hit a wall like this in your own family research, a woman who seems to vanish the moment she marries, let us know in the comments. Chances are she didn't vanish, she just wasn't the one the records were built to follow. If there's one practical takeaway from Sophia's story, it's this: When a female ancestor disappears from a census, don't just search under her parents' household. Look under her married siblings, her employers, anyone she might have lived alongside. Sophia turned up not simply as a Chown, but as a servant in her sister's home, a detail that would have stayed buried if we'd not understood the wider family. And when you do find her, read the official language carefully. Spinster of full age. Looks like nothing. It's actually a decade of an unrecorded life hiding in plain sight. Before we close, or rather, because family history research has a habit of not closing when you tell it to, a note on a discovery made after this video was essentially complete. A baptism record for Robert Chown, christened at Sidbury in Devon in 1802, has now come to light, establishing that William and Margaret Chown did have a son, and therefore that Sophia had a brother, some 21 years her senior. No further detail on Robert is available yet, whether he survived to adulthood, where he went, or what became of him remains an open question. Some of the texture around the Chown family as a household of daughters only may not fully hold once that research is done. What doesn't change is Sophia's story itself. Whatever Robert's fate, he was grown and gone long before she was born, and the sisters who shaped her life were still the sisters who shaped it. This is, in the end, exactly how family history works. You publish your best current understanding, and the records keep talking.